here at the Weekend Extra at Grace Church. I'm Tiffany, and we're here with Pastor Ryan, rounding out the sermon series of God and Money. And this sermon today was getting versus giving.
Yeah.
Okay, so it just kind of blew my mind a little bit. And I'm just curious, like, as Christ followers, where do we start?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think when we think about like being Christ followers in North America, right, in kind of a Western world where we have most of our needs met, at least most of us do, you end up landing somewhere where you already have a financial situation. So I think, like, if you answer the question, where do I start? I think step one is figuring out what's going on with me financially. You know, so I love the Dave Ramsey stuff, you know, especially like the beginning of it where it's talking about, you know, savings a little bit and then paying off consumer debt and then building a bigger emergency fund. And so I would say, like, yeah, start there. For most of us, some of us have a budget and we're used to living on one. Some of us have never even thought about it or worked on it. It's just kind of always worked. So I would say getting it to a place where I know where my money is going is kind of step one.
Okay.
And then focusing on saving a little bit to make sure I have like enough to cover an emergency. And then if you look at kind of consumer debt, you know, I would say land there. And sometimes the question comes up like, well, should I give?
Yeah, that was my next question.
Was it?
Right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about tithing.
Okay.
If you're in consumer debt, can you tithe?
That's a great question. I would say yes, right?
Okay.
If you have an income, you should, according to the scriptures, we should tithe off of that income. The counter, that's also true. If you don't have an income, there's nothing to tithe off of. Because the idea is I take the first 10% of whatever comes in. So if I got nothing coming in, I don't have anything to give back.
Right.
Right? And so whether you know, you're a high school student and you make, you know, $50 a week at Taco Bell, or you have, you know, a larger income, that 10% is equal sacrifice, you know, in a lot of ways. And so starting there and getting that moving, no matter what my financial situation is, as long as I have income coming in, for sure, tithing while paying off debt or getting emergency savings set in place, critical.
Yeah,
I think it's a big deal.
definitely. How about intentionality? How can we be more intentional about our giving?
One of the things I love to talk about with Christ followers, right? If we're going to talk about a Christ follower, is for Christ followers to think through, like, what does an intentional plan for my money mean over time? You know, most of us have thought about some kind of like number for retirement. You know, like Jeff talked about that, I think last week or a week before. Most of us have a number in our heads. Have we ever thought about a number for giving? You know, is there a giving target, an amount or a percentage that we'd like to live on or give away each year?
Sure.
And how do we kind of like move towards that over time, you know, and make that a big part of our life and our goal, you know, kind of dedicating our income to the Lord that way and our career to the Lord, whatever it looks like, to say, Lord, I want to advance this part of my life for you, you know, kind of on purpose.
Right.
And I think there can be a lot of joy there.
Absolutely.
You know, and I think it can protect us from things like greed and materialism, which certainly in our day and age, like that has to be a part of the conversation.
Sure.
You know, as I'm assessing giving and getting, how much does greed have a hold of me or not? I think that can be I think in my life, it's a lifelong conversation to figure out.
Definitely.
And kind of a wrestle, you know? And a lady stopped me in the hallway today and said, Ryan, I just got back from a mission trip. And she said, I'm so rocked by this mission trip because I have these friends and these people that I love, and they're in such great, dire need.
Yeah.
You know, and then she's like, I come home, and there's just this abundance everywhere.
Absolutely.
You know, and she just talked me through, she said, I'm really wrestling with, how do I live?
Right.
You know, how do I live in such a way that...
The guilt of worldly things, right?
Yeah, and she's like, I know I shouldn't feel guilty, but what kind of choices am I going to be excited about making?
Yeah.
You know, and how can I live in such a way that in 5 or 10 years I'm going to be proud of how I live today?
Sure.
You know, so I think those are the kinds of questions. And, you know, in a place of abundance where we live today, the vast majority of us, I think that conversation is going to be ever living and evolving.
Yeah.
You know, I don't feel like, I would say it's a huge challenge in my life. It was easier when I was like an intern and made, you know, $12,000 a year.
Right, but now we're parents and
you
right?
have people and you're trying to bless them and set them up and take care of parents and all that. And
getting spread thin the older we get,
gets
right?
complicated. Yeah, it sure does.
It definitely does.
Yep.
So circling back to parenting, in the second grade, I did a play, and there was a song we had to sing, "It is more blessed to give than receive." You touched on that today. It went way over my head in the second grade. No clue,
Sure.
just at all. But how do we, as Christ followers, incorporate that with our kids? How do we teach them
Yes.
now? I mean, there's so much to have. And like you said, with the mission trip and the lady that you met today,
Yep.
there's so many things that the kids just want, and you want to bless your children. So what's that break-even point as Christ followers where the getting versus the giving for them?
Yeah, I think it's a phenomenal question. I think our inherent, our built-in impulse is to give to our kids, right? Because we know it feels great to give to our kids.
Right.
But to go the next step and teach our kids to be givers is something that doesn't automatically come, I think,
Sure.
for us. And so I know in my life, when I was about 10 years old, I was exposed to real poverty outside of the country. And it marked me for life. I remember looking at this kid, Venezuelan kid, who was my age, and he had a little sandwich board full of cigarettes and gum and da-da-da. And I remember talking to him peer to peer, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I have to sell all this before I can go home at night."
And look at the impact that had on you.
Yeah, I mean, how many years later,
right?
and now it still marks me and it affects my
Yeah.
thinking. And so I think getting our kids in those kind of spaces where they can start to do their own math,
Yeah.
and realize, wait a minute, having another toy or another video game or more junk is
Right.
it's really not what it's about.
Yeah.
The world's a little bigger than that.
Sure. And I try to push gratitude.
Gratitude
That one is huge for me
It's
at my
huge.
house, for sure. And then I start to feel prideful by saying, "Don't you want to tell me thank you?"
Right.
That's the next thing that comes out.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, I think cultivating those kind of experiences and practices that's a great practice to do that.
yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for everything today. It was just so much to take in. Really appreciate you being here with us for us. Pastor Ryan, I'm Tiffany, and this is the Weekend Extra.